Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, sure.
Good afternoon, all. Today, I, Aditi Mittal, student of PGDM, on behalf of BIMTech, would like to welcome you all to the panel discussion on the topic Agricultural Producers Marketing Reforms Boon or Bane for Farmers. It is my privilege to welcome Ma'am Jayashree Mota, Chairperson, Board of Governors, Dr. Ajit Ranade, Group Executive President and Chief Economist at the Aditya Birla Group, Mr. Vikash Khandoi, Founder, Royal Philips, Kolkata, and member, Board of Governors. Also, I would like to extend a heartfelt welcome to Dr. P.P. Mathur, Vice Chancellor, Birla Global University, along with the Dean and Registrar of BGU, our sister institution. I would also like to extend a very warm welcome to the esteemed panelists, Dr. Sukhpal Singh, Professor IIM Ahmedabad, Mr. T.K. Arun, Consulting Editor, The Economic Times, Mr. Devinder Sharma, Food Policy Analyst, Dr. Anand Ranganathan, Professor JNU, and Mr. Dr. Aditya Panda, Senior Manager, Food Circular Economy, Coca-Cola India. From the past couple of weeks, all we have been hearing is farmers' protests against the farm bills, be it social media or news channel. But exactly what are these farm bills, and why is there so much agitation amongst the farmers against these bills? On September 27, India's president gave assent to three farm bills passed by the parliament. First bill is Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Bill. Through this, farmers can enter into written agreements with anyone, including a company, and sell them their produce for a set period of time as per the contract. The second one is the Farmer Agreement of Price Assurance and Farm Services Bill, which states that farmers can sell their produce anywhere and not just in the APMC approved marketplace. And they can sell interstate or intrastate or even online. The third one is the Essential Commodities Amendment Bill 2020, which aims to remove commodities like cereals, pulses, oilseeds, onion, and potatoes from the list of essential commodities. It will do away with the imposition of stock holding limits on such items except under extraordinary conditions. The key provisions of new farm bills really aim to help the marginal farmers who don't have means to either bargain to get a better price or invest in technology to improve the productivity of farms. But if these farm bills are made for the welfare of farmers, then why are there so many protests happening in the country? As students, many questions revolve in our minds. What is the misunderstanding between the farmers and the government? Are these farm bills really for the benefit of farmers? What is taking so long for the government to come up with a proper solution to all the chaos that is happening? And how can a win win situation be created for both farmers and the government? To discuss all these issues, we have with us five renowned panelists. First, we have Dr. Sukhpal Singh. Mr. Singh is a professor and former chairperson of Center for Management in Agriculture at IIM Ahmedabad, former Director General of Center for Research in Rural and Industrial Development, Chandigarh, and former professor and head of Agricultural Economic Research Unit at Institute of Economic Growth. He has been conferred the title of the Fellow of the Indian Society of Agricultural Economics for his contributions to the discipline and the society in 2018. Next, we have Mr. T.K. Arun. Mr. Arun is a consulting editor at the Economic Times. His blog Cursor appears on the paper's website. He has been the paper's resident editor at Delhi, headed the Economic Bureau, and looked after the editorial page in the past. He has been with the paper since 1994, except for a 2.5 year stint with the Dictom World. Next, we have Dr. Anand Ranganathan. Mr. Ranganathan is a professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He writes and appears frequently on television debates on politics, media, and science. His columns have appeared in Swarajya, News Laundry, DNA, First Post, and the News Minute. He is also the consulting editor of Swarajya. Next, we have Mr. Devinder Sharma. Mr. Sharma is a distinguished food and trade policy analyst. He is an award winning Indian journalist, writer, thinker, and researcher, well known and respected for his views on food and trade policy. Trained as an agricultural scientist, Mr. Sharma has been with the Indian Express. Last but not the least, we have with us Mr. Aditya Panda. Mr. Panda works with Coca-Cola India Private Limited. He is an IIM Ahmedabad alumnus and has 10 years of experience in agriculture and horticulture supply chain, CSR initiatives, farming, sustainability, improving social license, and creating social impact, along with commodity procurement and trading, contract farming operations, and many others. He is one of the core team members working closely with suppliers and farmers in defining procurement process. So, to welcome our guests, I would like our director, sir, to please deliver the welcome address.
Thank you, Aditi.
Thank you.
It's a great privilege to welcome all the esteemed panelists who have spared time for today's panel discussion on the topic of agricultural produces, marketing reforms, boon or bane for farmers. As you have heard about their profile, they are from different backgrounds. There are two academicians, Dr. Sukhpal Singh and Dr. Arun Ranganathan. There is one senior journalist, Mr. T.K. Arun. There is a practicing economist and a columnist, Mr. Devendra Sharma. And there is a young man who is managing agri-businesses on the part of a multinational company. It's a very diverse panel. We are hopeful that we will have a very good, rich discussion today. I'm also delighted to welcome the chairperson of our board, Mrs. Jayashree Motaji, who is also heading the board of governors of BIMTech, and also she is chairperson of a very renowned cultural organization of our country, that is Birla Academy of Art and Culture, Kolkata. She is also deeply involved in the businesses of BK Birla Group. She is executive vice chairman of the board of Jayashree Tea and Industries Limited. And for last couple of weeks, she has been showing and discussing with us the future of contract farming in our country. She has visited some contract farms at USA and other countries. She has her tea estates and farms in East Africa. So she has deep interest on this topic, and she has motivated us to organize this panel discussion. I would like to submit that this is not the first time we are inviting eminent economists. Every year we have been organizing discussions around the budget or some burning economic issues. Our board member, Dr. Ajit Ranade, who is president of Aditya Birla Group and chief economist in that group, he has been guiding us to navigate in this domain, because economics is a mother science for management. And without deep studies or understanding of economics, one cannot become a successful business leader or business manager. That is the reason we have given a lot of thrust on the studies of economics, research on economics. We are offering a 2 years full-time program for last 32 years. We are also conducting PhD program for last 20 years. So economics is an area where faculty and students at BIMTech, they take a lot of interest. And I would like to submit that pedagogy adopted at our institute for teaching economics related courses has been evolved during last 10 years or so. Earlier, we were using the traditional method of teaching economics, but at the initiative of Dr. Jagdish Settigar, now we are using a Socratic model of teaching economics, where the current issues are discussed in the class and students ask questions, teachers give the answers, and during this question and answer this type of conversations, the students are taught the basics of economics. We are offering 3 core courses. These 3 core courses are managerial economics, macroeconomics, and global business environment. So these are compulsory for all students. And we are also offering 3 optional courses. One of them is doing business in India. Second is the state of Indian economy. And third is emerging economies. So this is a bouquet of 6 courses we are offering to our PGDM students. And as I told you, that our faculty, led by Dr. Jagdish Settigar, Dr. Pooja Misra, they are competent and capable people who are using this discussion method, Socratic method to teach economics to our students. And this is the reason that many of the students have been getting internship at RBI, and they are also recruited by the banks, both private and public sector banks. So here I would stop. And once again, I welcome esteemed panelists. I also express my gratitude to our chairperson and Dr. Ajit Ranade for sparing time. I would also like to inform that we have a sister institution, Birla Global University at Bhubaneswar. The Vice Chancellor, Dr. P.P. Mathur, Registrar, Dr. B.K. Das, and Dean Management, Dr. Parmeshwar Naik, are also connected, and they have joined. So thank you to all of them. And over to the Dr. Pooja Misra, who is the moderator for today's panel discussion.
Thank you so much, sir. Aditi, I'll take over. Okay, so like Aditi mentioned and Director Sir also mentioned, students, I must specify that we have a very illustrious and diverse panel of experts. Dr. Sukhpal Singh, he's from IIM Ahmedabad, like they said. He will be able to enlighten us on the policy details, which I'm sure each one of you want to know more in depth. Dr. Devinder Sharma, he's a food and trade policy analyst, and he can share his viewpoints on these farm bills. Mr. T.K. Arun, I'm sure you read his columns many a time in the Economic Times. Dr. Anand Ranganathan, he's a common figure, I'm sure. We all see him on many of television debates, probably every night. Last but not the least, a warm welcome also to Mr. Aditya Panda, who's closely aligned with agricultural initiatives of Coca-Cola, and he can specifically tell us more about ground realities. So as far as the bills are concerned, students, I'm sure you know that these three farm bills have been brought about with the perspective of promoting barrier-free interstate and intrastate trade of farmer produce. So when we got to know about the bills, it was more in terms of that it would be a situation of my crop, my right, as far as the farmers are concerned. Few key provisions of the bill is, like I said, encourage and provide for barrier-free trade outside the mandis designated as market yards. Secondly, importantly, is where they're permitting electronic trading of farmers' produce, encouraging setting up a farmer producer organization. And that's going to be a key feature in the next couple of years for sure. Now, but the catch here or the question here is that we've seen in the past couple of weeks, the country has been witnessing mixed reactions to these bills. So, and that's why we've all collected here today, just so that we can get a diverse opinion as far as these bills are concerned. Dr. Sukhpal Singh, could we start with you? Can you share with us the policy perspective and probably a critical analysis of the bills? Dr. Sukhpal Singh?
Thank you, Pooja. What is the time frame?
About 12 to 15 minutes, sir.
12 to 15 minutes. Because I would also not be able to stay back after 4:30.
Okay, fair.
So because I have another meeting starting at 4:45.
Okay.
So what I would be happy to continue before that as soon as possible.
Right.
So I think that's good enough time for me to make some remarks on the. So let me start by saying that I believe that marketing reforms, agriculture marketing reforms are needed. Farmers need more choices of channels, as buyers need more choices to go to farmers. So nobody disputes that. And let me also make it clear that I would not touch any aspect of policy today. I would just comment on the regulation. That is this, what I call 2.5 acts, not 3 actually. Okay. I tell you why I call it 2.5. Because the ECA is, since they are 1995, it has been there. It's not new. Only amendments have been made. Then the other 2 acts are the acts which have come into being for the first time in the history of this country as central legislation on a domain which was, until these acts came in, being attended by state regulation at the state level. Okay. So these 2. And third one I would like to say before I'm mistaken is that I believe that India's small farmers are the most efficient producers within India as well as globally anywhere. They are doing the best possible job. So I'm proud of them, as most of you, I'm sure. The other aspect I want to talk about before I get into the acts is that, see, there are 4 levels at which you can look at these new legislations. One is the federal context. As I said, it's first time that a subject which was earlier being treated as a state subject of lawmaking has been brought under concurrent list. So some states, some people, some thinkers have some opinion on that. The second is the farmer, for whom all this is being done. What would be the implications of this for the farmers? And when I say farmer, I mean that 2.5 acre farmer, half of whose land is generally dry, who doesn't get adequate institutional credit, who is generally not covered by crop insurance, and who faces not only production risk, but also market risk. That is the profile of an Indian farmer I have in my mind when I talk about farmers in India. So what are the implications of this for the farmer? Third is the form. What is there in the legislation? What is the content of these acts, which we need to examine? And fourth is the future. What are the implications of these acts for the various stakeholders? Yeah, the buying side, the supplying side, the intermediaries, the consumers, and whatnot. So I think that is the way one would like to look at this whole change which has come before us now. So with that kind of introductory remark, now I would like to share with you a few aspects of these acts now, not bills or ordinances anymore. I think the stated objective is to integrate Indian agricultural markets. The famous thing we know is one nation, one market, which until now we had attempted only at the state level with the help of E-NAM. The second is freedom of choice for the farmer, which I believe and many others believe was already there. Farmers were never constrained from selling to anyone. It was buyers who were constrained because they had to take a permission from the APMC, they had to take a license and whatnot. The third is this barrier-free interstate trade, because intrastate trade was already under the APMC Act and it is being allowed, permitted. Interstate trade is already under the union list. And most important objective of this reform seems to be to attract private investment in agriculture and agricultural markets. So I would assess these acts in the light of these stated objectives, nothing beyond. Now let's come to, I would generally not talk about ECA because that concerns us all. Okay. So that is not only specific to farmers, as many co-panelists would also agree with me on that to some extent. My concern is more with the two new acts, which have sort of changed the very domain of sort of regulation from the states to the center, at least in one part of the market. They are now confined to the APMC market yards and sub-yards. And let's also not forget the history of agricultural market reforms in this country. It's not that we are seeing this for the first time. The magnitude and the level is different now, but since 2003, when the first model APMC Act came in, which was again from the Union Ministry of Agriculture, which had mandated or rather recommended to the states saying, please amend your APMC Acts. They are quite old and outdated now because they were enacted in the 1960s and early 70s. Things are changing, markets are changing. So why don't you also open up? So that 2003 APMC Act, Model Act, which was titled APMC Regulation Act 2003, basically asked states to provide for 3 more channels under their jurisdiction, under their wings only, saying that the buyer should be allowed to buy directly from farmers, that contract farming should be made legal, and that there could be private wholesale markets next to the APMC Mandi. APMC Mandi is Dana Mandi, Sabji Mandi, Anaj Mandi, grain market. There are different names given to this wholesale markets, which has been the formal place, more in some states, less in some states, and no APMC markets in some states like Kerala. So we should remember, this country is very varied in terms of the level and nature of agricultural development and agricultural market development. You really can't compare 2 states in every sense of the term. So we had states which had very robust APMC regulation and infrastructure. We had other states which had very weak regulation but good enough agri-market infrastructure. Other states which had no regulation and no infrastructure, other states which never thought about there could be this kind of arrangements or lawmaking or creating a marketplace for farmers. So that is the variety we have. So this 2003 thing, when it started, it started because before that, every buyer had to take a permission or a license from the APMC to undertake any of the three things: direct purchase, contract farming, or setting up a private wholesale market. And the APMC could give that license, refuse that license, charge fees, charge initial fees, and ask the buyer contracting agency or private mandi player to also pay some other charges on the produce handled. And the fact of life is that the two channels we are talking about today, the contract farming and private wholesale markets, have been with us now. More of contract farming, which has been in existence in this country, at least the way I would like to define it, since the 1960s, with seed contract farming, both by the state and the private and the multinational agencies, and also in a state like Punjab since late 80s, with the coming in of the Pepsi project for perishables, tomato, potato, and chilies, and so on. And private whole markets, unfortunately, it has not happened, despite being permitted since the last decade. I only know Maharashtra, which has been able to make some headway in terms of having a few dozen private wholesale markets. Otherwise, that is a channel which, because there is also an issue of conflict of interest. I'm referring to this because the genesis of this new acts is also from that angle, because private wholesale market would directly take away a part of the volume being traded in a what I call multi-stakeholder body called APMC Mandi. Because to me, APMCs are not the way sometimes they are projected. They are by principle democratically elected multi-stakeholder bodies. If you don't look at Punjab, which is a default case in many ways, because it has not conducted elections for the last 4 or 5 decades to the APMCs or the board. Other states like Gujarat, Maharashtra, Karnataka have very vibrant APMCs with elections being fought very vigorously. So these are bodies which have farmer representatives, majority, then trader and commission agent representatives, government representatives, and cooperative representatives. So they are constituted of all the stakeholders to protect various stakeholders' interests, and they go by the rules of the APMC Act, whether open auction or charging the farmer for certain services provided, or allowing the Artiya or the commissioner to charge some commission for the services rendered, or for the buyer to pay some charges for buying from that marketplace. So the conflict of interest I'm talking about is that when, cut the long story short, because after 2003 Model Act, then the previous UPA government, somewhere around 2008, had actually brought up this topic. And I was sort of witness to that, but it was not pursued after a while. And then this idea of denotifying fruits and vegetables from the APMC was floated, again by the UPA and picked up by the NDA government since then. And many states have now denotified fruits and vegetables, saying these are perishable produce, high value produce, need not be wasted by taking it through the mandi system and adding on costs to it by adding market fees and commissions and whatnot, which I have been principally against it. I will tell you later why I'm against it. Then about 3 years back, the union government, after taking call on all the reforms being undertaken by different states under the Model APMC Act, said that states are not doing enough. Let's have another round at counseling them. So it came up with the Model Agricultural and Livestock Produce Market, not regulation, Promotion and Facilitation Act 2017. And here they removed contract farming from it, saying that there is a conflict of interest, that the APMCs would not like the contracting companies to come in, because that produce will not come to the market. And if it doesn't come to the market, you don't have much justification to charge a market fee on that. So let's make a separate act on contract farming. And that was called Model Agriculture and Livestock Produce, Contract Farming and Services, Promotion and Facilitation Act 2018. So I argued that there is a bigger conflict of interest when an APMC permits a private wholesale market, because that is directly hitting your volumes of trade. Whereas contract farming is still a small activity taking place far away from the market in the fields. So if you think the contract farming conflicts with APMC's interest,
Private wholesale market conflicts even further and in a much bigger way. So why not take also private wholesale markets outside the purview of the APMC? But that was not done. The idea of contract farming being separately legislated was picked up from Punjab. Again, a bad example. Punjab had passed a separate contract farming act in 2013 because they could not amend the APMC act for various reasons. And this idea was picked from there and brought before us as a separate act. I personally feel there's no need to do that. Now let me come to quickly, because I'm adjusting my time, I think. These three acts, which have now, somehow the government thought that we are not getting the reforms at the speed and the extent to which should be that 100%. I personally feel we were doing almost, we were there at 80%. If we look around all the major agriculture states, about 20 plus states have allowed contract farming. They have allowed direct purchase. All your food supermarkets are buying directly by taking license from APMCs. And 20 plus states also have allowed private wholesale markets, so markets have not come up. And most of them have single license now for the whole state, not APMC wise. And e-trading is also allowed and so on. So I was thinking that 70 to 80% of the reforms were already done by the states at their own level, but it was definitely not 100%. Now let's see what has been done. I will just look at two acts, that is Agricultural Produce, Trade and Commerce Promotion and Facilitation Act 2020, to which we generally, to cut the sort of long title short, we call it APMC Mandi Bypass Act. Basically what it does is that you don't need to go through the Mandi system. Mandi will be restricted now to the yards and sub-yards. They can do anything there. The rest of the area, which earlier used to be part of the notified area, and all the major crops being grown there were notified crops, which could run into hundreds in some states, that that notified area will be now open to anybody to trade in. And the most discomforting thing I find there is that most of you who are the part of this panel 24, including myself, that we have overnight become eligible to be wholesale traders in agricultural produce. Anybody who has a PAN card can go and deal in farm produce. So I don't think we should have done that. That is no regulation. That is no way of conducting business when small farmers are involved. And I can tell you already cases which are happening around the country because of this. So that is one part which is second. I was, Dr. Pooja Mishra referred to FPOs. I'm a great fan of FPOs. I've done the second study, which will be published very soon. I did the first study in India in 2010-11, published in 2014. I feel that that is the way to go for small farmer development. But the treatment we are given to FPOs here, just calling them farmers, just calling them farmers on the supplying side, not giving them any role on the buying side. I can challenge you, I don't come across any FPO in this country. I have visited maybe 35 this time, I had visited 25 last time, and I visited many others in between. I would have visited at least 70 to 80, if not more, FPOs by now in my last 10 years. I have not come across any FPO which does farm production. But you have put them there. Most of the FPOs do buying and selling. Buying of inputs for farmers, selling of output for farmers, and even undertaking contract farming. That role is forgotten. Yeah, other crazy thing I want to talk about is the Act also talks about framing separate rules for payment by FPOs for their members. We are trying to now tell Amul when to pay its members for the milk they have supplied to Amul. I think they are member-owned, member-controlled, member-managed bodies. Nobody has any business to tell how to deal with their members. Members decide whether they will supply, how much they supply, under what terms and conditions. So government has even gone to that extent that has specified separately payment rules when a FPO buys from its member farmers. I think that was also a step which should not have been undertaken at all. It is overdone, job overdone. There's no need to be there. Now let me come to the last part of this act, then I move to Contract Farming Act. If we are saying that this kind of freeing up of markets would lead to new investments, yeah, that's a very good objective to look for. But if you look back at even a more extreme situation of a state called Bihar, which didn't even let the APMC remain like this act now, at least lets it be there at least by principle. Bihar, which abolished the very APMC Act altogether for the last 14 years, I have also been there a couple of times, can be assessed what gains Bihar has got after this complete deregulation of agricultural markets. Are farmers getting better prices? Have new investment flown into Bihar? Have the existing APMC mandi structure survived, or it's a withered away? So I think that's a very good litmus test to see this kind of deregulation, what it will lead to and can lead to. I think now I only one more fact of life I want to give, that for the last couple of months, this act has been into force. 47 mandis in Madhya Pradesh have gone out of business. Another 149 mandis have lost business up to 40 to 60% compared to the same months last year. And Mandi Board has lost revenue, which is very significant. None of the farmers have got MSP other than the wheat crop in that state this season, last season. So that is the state of affairs. Now let me come to the second part. Pooja, I have another 5 to 7 minutes.
2-3 minutes.
Sorry. 3 minutes. Okay. No, it's okay. So fine, I can always come back. Contract farming. Again, I am all for contracting. I believe that no channel is good or bad. It is how you let it come in, how you monitor, how you regulate, how you prepare your farmers to deal with it, that makes it good or bad. Yeah. So I soiled my hands with contract farming research for the last 3 decades, if not more. And let me tell you, the way this act has dealt with this concept and its practice, it has created more confusion than clarification. People are confusing it with corporate farming, which it is not. I say that as long as this country's whatever number of states have their ceilings on Land Holdings Act and restrictions on Land Leasing Act, nobody, mind it, nobody other than the farmer can undertake farming in this country. If somebody is doing, it's illegal activity, informal activity, should be taken to task. And people are doing, I can tell you this on record. So this, the way it is defined, creates this fear in the mind of the farmer, because the way production agreement is defined, the way, not only this act, the way one state which was trying to undo the act and trying to bring its own amendments, ended up reading it this way. I'm shocked to say this, ended up reading this way and have written its contract, amended Contract Farming Act, that if the company undertakes farming on farmers' land, please remove your workers before the end of contract. There cannot be anything worse than this. If somebody says this can be part of contract farming, we are living in a fool's paradise. That is not what contract farming is supposed to be. The other part, which is applicable to both the other act and the dispute resolution mechanism. We know earlier it was under APMC, because APMC was an elected body, farmers were represented there, farmers were going to sell there, they knew the Mandi secretary, they knew the member, knew the chairperson, knew the auction officer, Boli officer. So if there was an issue and the traders and commission agents had to take licenses and give a counterparty risk coverage by giving bank guarantees. So you could take them to task. Now somebody comes with a pan, takes my produce, where do I go if he's not paid me? Yeah, so that is another part. Similarly, contract farming. I'm not registered anywhere. I undertake crop. The guy doesn't procure, runs away. Where do I go? You say go to SDM and DC. Are these the places to go to for farmers actually? Given that we know the state of our administrative and legal structure, the way they function. Yeah. Let me now conclude by saying that the way this Act looks at contract farming. I will go one more example before. The guidelines, I also looked at the guideline to the Contract Farming Act. It is surprising and shocking again that it gives a role to a sharecropper in a contract farming agreement. It says that the sharecropper is party to the contract agreement, then he or she would be responsible for receiving the farm inputs on the company and making good use of it. I have never seen any contract like this in my life. I would like to see if somebody can show me this kind of where the worker on the farm becomes a party to the contract. Yeah. then worst of all, it links the Contract Farming Act says that other than the pre-agreed minimum price, if the company wants to pay bonus or premium, please link it to the APMC mandi price. यहां से निकले थे वहीं फिर पहुंच गए. हम कह रहे थे APMCs are not good enough. They are not discovering prices well. Now when the company wants to pay, you say, no, look at there, peg it to that APMC price or e-trading price, and then pay this bonus or premium. I think that is a disservice to the very concept of contract farming, which should discover its own prices, which have no linkage with any other channel, but that's what we have done. So finally, let me end by saying that to me, we had a much better arrangement for contract farming in the model APMC Act 2003, where there were not only mandatory and optional provisions of the contract farming agreement specified, but also a model contract farming agreement was given. To me, these acts are more about promotion and facilitation and not about regulation. Whereas we need regulation in this country to protect the farmer's interest because he or she is a smaller party in the contract arrangement. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Singh. Can I now move to Mr. Devendra Sharma? So, Mr. Sharma, we're all aware that you've been closely researching on the agricultural sector. So, could you also share probably some issues or viewpoints of the farmers who have been agitating with regards to these acts? Mr. Sharma?
Thank you very much, Pooja, and thank you to BIMTech for inviting me for this wonderful panel discussion. Yesterday only I was at the Singhu border, and where I met the farmers, saw their enthusiasm, their dedication, the bonhomie, and why they feel that they have been wronged all these years. But before I go to that, I think Professor Sukhpal had made my task easier by spelling out what is missing in these farm bills. And also, I think when he mentioned about the Bihar example, I think it is very illustrative of the kind of market reforms that we are trying to bring in. I remember in 2006 when there was excitement all around and we were told that Bihar is going to be the new model of market-driven agriculture in India. We will forget about Punjab. The attention should now divert to Bihar. That is what was said. And it was rightly mentioned that Bihar was presented as a case study that, private investments will flow in, private mandis would be set up, and we will have price discovery. I don't know. I sometimes admire economists for coming up with this crazy kind of definitions, price discovery. 14 years later, just the season which has ended, the paddy procurement season that has ended, Punjab has seen an inflow of 50 lakh tons of paddy from Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, much of it from Bihar. Hundreds of FIRs have been lodged against those traders who transported that paddy to Punjab. Why it was coming to Punjab is because in Bihar, despite 14 years of reforms, the so-called market-driven reforms, the farmers are getting 1,000 to 1,200 rupees maximum as the procurement price for paddy. And traders find it economical to transport it all the way to Punjab, where it is sold at the minimum support price of 1,888 rupees per quintal. And this is not the first time that produce from Bihar has been brought to Punjab and Haryana and sold here. It has been happening quite regularly. And I have been writing about it, saying that that model of a market economy has actually failed farmers in Bihar. It's a lost generation. If Bihar had instead worked on spreading the regulated markets and setting up a network of regulated markets and ushered in a system of minimum support price all crops, at least I would have seen the Bihar farmers coming up to the level of Punjab farmers. But now I think the entire intention of the farm bills is to bring Punjab farmers also to the level of Bihar farmers, because gradually the APMC mandis will become redundant. And the MSP, of course, is the intention has been quite clear from several years that MSP is a hurdle in price discovery and so on, and it must be done away with. So that is a kind of a fear that the farmers carry. But also equally important is to understand that we have actually cut and paste these market reforms from what has been happening in America and Europe. For 6-7 decades in America, at least the period that at least I have been following closely, I realized that the market reforms in agriculture have actually failed in America to prop up farm incomes. Now, if it has failed in America and Europe, I don't know how we see and what wisdom we see in bringing up the same failed model, not drawing any lessons and introducing in India as market reforms. I think this is something we need to really understand and examine and also research, and then see where is the advantage when the same system has failed in a country where the landholding size is much bigger than in India. It was, even if it was meant for that kind of a landholding, it didn't help the farmers to prop up their income. So what are we trying to expect here in India? What miracle do we expect that it will bring about in India, where the landholdings, as was said earlier, is less than 5 acres per of a majority of the farmers? We know 86% farmers have a landholding size of less than 5 acres. Why I brought up the example of America is that America, despite the reforms being in practice for so many decades now, this year, if you look at the bankruptcy figures for American farmers are saddled with a bankruptcy of $425 billion. According to the Environment Working Group in America, in the last 25 years, America has pumped in $425 billion. Ironically, the amount is same. After pumping in $425 billion in the last 25 years, what American farmers are saddled with today is again a bankruptcy of $425 billion. And if you look at the rate of suicide in rural America is 45% higher than in urban America. And the chief economist of US Department of Agriculture has gone on record a couple of years back saying that in America since the 1960s, farm incomes, if you adjust for inflation, have been on a steep decline. That is happening in a country where we think markets are efficient. I wonder if markets were so efficient, why their agriculture has to be sustained by massive agriculture subsidies that the OECD countries provide, and which we all know is a bone of contention when the WTO negotiations happen, the WTO ministerial conferences happen. It has been an ongoing process for the last so many years that we have seen every time a heated debate before the WTO ministerial. And not only the inefficiency of the markets that we see in America, which has failed to help the farmers. If you look at even the agriculture exports, they are also dependent on the federal support. Otherwise, the so-called market efficiency or the competitiveness of agriculture exports all crashes there. I remember an UNTAD India study in 2007, which said that if you withdraw the green box subsidy, which is, as you know, as per the WTO parlance, if you withdraw the green box subsidies, the non-trade distorting subsidies from the OECD countries, then the agriculture exports of America, Europe, and Canada drop by 40%. Where is that market competitiveness that we are all proud of? And in fact, if you look at America, every 5 years they come up with a farm bill. And if you look at the provision the farm bill makes, it must tell us that the entire agriculture, that whatever remains in America, is actually being sustained by these federal subsidies. In the 2018 farm bill, America has made a provision for roughly $1 trillion of the subsidies, which for various other programs, including also direct income support, which is now been withdrawn lately. But that's the kind of support America has spelled out for $1 trillion for the next 10 years. Now, that is not the first time it has been done like that, but earlier also, as I said, it has been a continuous process. So what we see and what we believe is market efficiency in America, as far as agriculture is concerned, actually is the federal support that goes to feed this so-called market efficiency. Withdraw these subsidies, and we will see agriculture in a terrible, terrible state of despair in America and Europe. If you look at Europe, $100 billion of subsidy every year. And yet, look at, I remember some years back when I was at a conference at the UK Food Group in London, the data presented said that every minute one farmer quits agriculture. If you look at Europe, when Ronald Reagan was the president, his agriculture secretary had made a statement, get big or get out. And then even Donald Trump's agriculture secretary has said, in America, the big get bigger, the smaller go out. That is exactly the model that we have brought in India. But we are shying of saying that actually we want to say what the IFPRI, International Food Policy Research Institute's Director General, had in a recommendation for India, said India should follow move up or move out. There is no difference in the three statements. The point I'm trying to make is, if the intention of India is to push these people out of agriculture, where do they go? I would like to know, first of all. But nevertheless, I think Indian economists need to look beyond the kind of market economics that have been doled out to us and look into the ground realities and see what is good for us, where our strengths lies, and how we can ensure that agriculture becomes economically viable and sustainable in the years to come. Now, why I'm saying economically viable and sustainable? Because for the last 4 decades, Indian agriculture agriculture has suffered tremendously because of the kind of policies that we have brought in. I've always said that agriculture has been deliberately kept impoverished to actually sustain economic reforms. And that is something we need to understand. I remember an UNTAD study, and I'm not sure about which year, but it was for 20 years, from 1980s period to 2000 period. And it said that output price of agriculture across the globe has remained static or frozen for the last 20 years if we adjust for inflation. The next 20 years, I think we should see an OECD study with ICRIER in New Delhi has shown that Indian farmers lost 45 lakh crore rupees between 2000 and 2016 in that 16-year period. I think 45 lakh crore loss is an extraordinary crisis that was hitting agriculture. Did you ever see a debate in India on that kind of a loss that Indian farmers were suffering in this country? No, nobody's bothered about farmers. It's only corporates that we are all worried about. We think that market economy only talks about how to help the corporates, how to bring about a kind of a system which actually negates or which actually creates a kind of inequality as far as the farmers and the companies are concerned. Look at one of our former chief advisors or chief economic advisor to the government of India. He said when we write off corporate loans, it leads to economic growth. Oh my God, I'm surprised if that is the definition of economic growth. And then we are told by the former RBI chief and also the State Bank of India chief that when we waive a farmer's loan, that it leads to credit indiscipline and it leads to upsetting of the national balance sheet. Surprisingly, both corporates and the farmers draw loan from the same banks. When one defaults, it is called economic growth when you write it off. And when the other defaults, it is called, my God, credit indiscipline, and the farmers have to pay for it, and this must stop. Every time, at least television channel show that I went to, their discussion was that this, waiving the farmer loan waiver should be completely put an end to. But whereas corporate, loan waiver, loan write-offs, nobody talked about it. I haven't seen a debate happening in this country in the same vigor that when we complain farmers of creating a national imbalance as far as the balance sheets are concerned. The point I'm trying to make is the economic policies have to be seen in the context of how we are playing one against the other. Now, the part here is that, when we talk of 2000 and 2016, 45 lakh crore was the loss. I think it was an underestimate because simple reason, they only studied a handful of crops. I wish they had studied the entire spectrum of agriculture and we would have known what kind of extent of, loss that the Indian farmers have been bearing over the years. Then I remember the economic survey in 2016, which said that the average income of a farming family in 17 states of India, which roughly means half the country, is rupees 20,000 a year. 20,000 a year means less than 1,700 rupees a month. That's the kind of income, that the farmer is surviving in half the country. 1,700 rupees a month. I can't even rear a cow in 1,700 rupees. I wonder how these families have been surviving year after year. And yet this country has produced record production year after year. And that tells you that the farmers of this country have actually been producing wealth for this country, where they have been not compensated all these years. Shanta Kumar Committee brought one thing in public domain, public understanding, that only 6% farmers get the benefit of MSP. 94% farmers are dependent on markets. Now, this could be 6 to 15%, 25%, as many would calculate. That's okay. But still, the majority or the bulk of farmers in this country have been dependent on markets. If markets were so efficient, please tell me why agriculture is in such a terrible state of despair and distress that it is undergoing. There is an agrarian crisis that we see in India, which is phenomenal. And that is because the markets have not performed the way they should have performed, or the kind of expectation we have from the markets. Now we are shifting from one kind of markets to another kind of markets. And I again see a kind of excitement in this country. In 2006, I remember the excitement that prevailed when Bihar did away with the APMC Act. Now I see the excitement from the same class of people who think that, farmers are being misled to believe that, they will not be getting a higher income. In fact, the market reforms are so designed that the farmers would get a higher income. I see economists saying this. I see corporates saying this. I see the policymakers also saying this. Well, if everyone is so excited that the farmers are going to get a higher price, the question I want to ask is, higher price to what? Higher price to what? After all, there has to be a benchmark. And the benchmark in this country, whether it is good or bad or is not completely reflective, is the minimum support price. If everyone is willing to give us a higher price as compared to the MSP, then what is wrong in making MSP a legal right for the farmers? So far we have seen in Punjab and Haryana, farmers getting a minimum support price for wheat and paddy. It's an open-ended procurement system we have in Punjab and Haryana. There are several flaws in the APMC mandi structure. Yes, we need to reform those that APMC structure. There's no denying about it. But to throw it away, I think is not what the country requires. Having said that, I think what is important today is to understand that what the farmers need is a minimum support price, a minimum assurance that they will be getting at least this kind of a price, and that will be the real independence for farmers. A study has shown recently that in just 2 months of October and November, looking at the government's own portal of what has been marketed in this country, the study tells us that farmers lost 1,900 crores in just 2 months for not getting the MSP. And this is not only wheat and paddy, it's for other crops also. So why do we have a contempt for farmers? I don't understand. Why are people not standing up and saying that farmers also need a higher income? Let's follow a benchmark. Let's ensure that there's no trading happening in this country below the minimum support price. The argument that I hear when I make this argument is...
Sharma, sorry, can I just step in another minute, please? I'm sorry.
Okay,
yeah.
When I make this suggestion that, we should have MSP, a legal instrument, then the figures are thrown up. Oh, it is going to be some 4 lakh crore additional burden. Somebody says 6 lakh crore additional burden. Somebody says 13 lakh crore of additional burden every year. Somebody says 17 lakh crore of a burden every year. I think these kinds of fear psychosis that we are trying to create is not what is wanted today. When the 7th Pay Commission, nobody talked about where will the money come from. 7th Pay Commission, according to Credit Suisse, means an annual additional burden of 4,80,000 crores. Did you hear any economist telling us that the fiscal deficit will go up? Did you hear anyone telling us that where will this money come from? But you try to give on the same amount of money or less than even that to farmers, and there will be a halla gola in this country. The point I'm trying to make is the time has come, and the farmers' protest is primarily for one thing, and that is that they be given an assured income by way of an assured price. That is what the farmers need. And if the companies are so keen to do it, I think minimum support price should be the base, the benchmark below which they should not be allowed to operate on. So I think if that is the factor, yes, we are willing to have that kind of reforms. But unless you are honestly coming up and standing and telling us what is the kind of income that you're going to give it to farmers, I think these reforms will not be in favor of farmers. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Sharma. I'm sure the entire panel will agree on one fact, that the perspective of everybody is to make farming economically viable. So I'll move to Mr. T.K. Arun. So, Mr. Arun, what is your perspective on this entire issue of the Farm Acts? Where do you think is the disconnect between the farmers and the government? Because the government is stepping in and they're trying to say that they will amend the acts. So, what is your viewpoint on that, Mr. Arun?
Yeah. So, we are now at 3:53. I'll try to finish by 4:08.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Let me begin by saying that we cannot really discuss farming in isolation from the rest of the economy. How dynamic farming is, how dynamic agriculture is, actually depends on how dynamic the rest of the economy is, how prosperous the rest of the economy is, how capable of providing employment the rest of the economy is. Let's understand one thing. The level of productivity in farming required to sustain a population of nearly 8 billion people is so high that it does not require a very large population working on farms to produce the output that is required. And this creates a very major problem of underemployment in farming across the world. This is why the farming population has come down sharply in most industrial countries. Less than 2% of the population work on farms in the US. In Europe, up to 5% in some countries. In India, 41% of the workforce is still engaged in farming. 40% of the farmers surveyed in 2004-05 told the Situation Assessment Survey of the NSSO that if they had an option, they would not be farming, right? So that is the state of farming in this country. Let's say agri reform actually did not start with reform in agriculture. It started with reform in industry and tariffs. it is important to realize how crucial industrial tariffs are to the terms of trade of agriculture. In 1991, when the government slashed industrial tariffs across the board, what happened was that the relative price of farm goods went up. The prices of industrial products came down, and because they came down, the number of sacks of grain that a farmer had to surrender to procure a tractor or procure a bag of fertilizer, it fell down sharply because industry had to become more competitive because they were facing competition from the rest of the world. So the beginning of reforming agriculture and the beginning of enriching farmers has to come with less protection for industry from world competition and having a more productive, competitive industry, which will be able to generate goods and supply to the farmers and the other sectors of the economy at world prices. Now, that is one important thing. And macroeconomic stability will determine the level of inflation in the economy, the rate at which prices go up, the prices that farmers get, the prices that farmers confront when they go to market to buy, then what they need for their life, for their existence, and what they need for farming. These are all determined by overall macroeconomic policies and stability. This is not something that is amenable to being improved within farming itself. So it is a part of the overall economy. Similarly, international trade policy. When onion prices go up in this domestic market, our government habitually impose a ban on export of onions. This will prevent farmers from getting the full price that they otherwise would get, right? And who is doing this? The central government is doing this. This happened even now, even after the farm bills were introduced. And when onion prices went up, the central government, which now wants the market forces to work in agriculture, suddenly felt it necessary to clamp down on exports. We had for long stretches of time during the UPA an export of rice because food prices had gone up. Now, so it is actually overall economic policy, international trade policy, macroeconomic policies, which determine how competitive the economy is, how intersectoral dynamics play out between farming and non-farming. Let's understand this. Secondly, the current status quo is not viable, it's not tenable. We cannot continue with this. When the buffer stocking norm is 30 million tons, we procure 90 or 95 million tons. That's the level of stocks in the government stocks. What do we do with these stocks? A lot of stocks actually rot, they go bad, some is pilfered, and there's a huge financing cost to carry this kind of an unnecessary stock. And our prices are above global prices, we cannot even export. We exported sugar, giving a huge subsidy on the little bit of sugar that we managed to export. So we cannot really be part of the globalized world economy and also have agriculture production that is inefficient by global standards. And one major input to raising efficiency levels in agriculture is actually price. So prices will have to be, in some way or the other, benchmarked against global prices. I don't say that we need to expose our farmers directly to the full impact of global price changes. There will be tariffs, there will be quotas, there will be various kinds of insulation. But it cannot be completely unrelated to what efficiency prices are the world over. Can the Indian farming sector, actually employ as many people as it currently employs? It cannot. It should not. So where will these people go? They must be absorbed by a dynamic industrial and service sectors. It is only when that happens that we will see incomes in the rural economy go up. And this actually happened. We saw it not only in the experience of rich countries today, where, as I told you, the population that live directly off agriculture shrunk to a single-digit level. We saw it in India itself. Between 2008 and 2014, when the construction boom happened in the cities, and infrastructure was being built, towns were being built, townships were being built, real estate sector was booming. You saw a large number of people migrating from rural areas to take up these jobs that opened up in the booming construction industry and town building. And so wages went up in the rural sector and wages went up in the construction sector. Poverty fell sharply, living standards improved, and we saw productivity go up because people were producing the same amount of production output because you just didn't need so many people to do what they were doing. But of course, thereafter, the economy's turned and our fortunes have gone down a little bit, so that trend has stopped. So things need to change. But the question is, how will they change? Can we expect things to change all of a sudden? You know, most of BeamTech students, when they pass out, will hope to work for some company or the other, right? I don't think many students will actually favor working for becoming entrepreneurs. How many students can have the guts to turn entrepreneurs? Right. Now, when you say farmers who have been used to producing something, say rice or wheat in Punjab, and supplying to the government at the minimum support price, and they are habituated to the ecosystem, you tell them, now you are on your own. This support will not be provided to the same extent as in the past. Now, and it is like saying that everybody who passes from BeamTech should become entrepreneurs without a steady salary, where larger decisions that decide the viability of business will be taken by somebody else. Can everybody become an entrepreneur? So we need to create a transition mechanism which will allow farmers who are so used to growing wheat and rice in Punjab and Haryana and Western UP to move out of this unnecessary grain production, which the economy doesn't need, which the world doesn't need, and move into other kinds of produce, of which there is a shortage in this country. We steadily import oil seeds, we steadily import lentils, protein. So we should be actually encouraging our farmers to produce a more diverse set of crops. The second largest category of agricultural exports in the world is actually fruits and vegetables. And we do import a fair bit of fruits and vegetables. Will somebody else whose mic is unmuted kindly mute the mic? Can I ask all fellow panelists to kindly mute their mic?
Sure, sir. Go ahead. We can hear you, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, and we can see if you go to the market today and you buy apple, you will find the apples probably come from Australia, or they come from America, or they come from some other country. We are so used to importing fruit. Why can't our farmers produce fruit? In fact, some of the most prosperous farmers in Punjab actually grow fruit and flowers. They don't actually grow grain. It's only the less prosperous, less enterprising farmer who relies on supplying to the government's procurement machinery. So the status quo cannot continue. It is unviable and is unnecessary. We don't need so much of grain. We need to move to something else. But how is that transition to take place? Can we expect the market alone to enable this, allow this transition to take place? When farmers in Punjab and Haryana were, at that time it was United Punjab, were induced to produce the Green Revolution, they did not do it because of the market forces. They were coaxed, they were trained, they were given support. The Punjab Agriculture University, they introduced farmers to new varieties of wheat and rice. New growing techniques were taught to them. The government came with a system of support prices. The government deployed agriculture extension officers to get farmers to move to the new varieties of crop. The government set up a procurement agency. So a whole lot of work went into creating a system whose beneficiaries the entire country became, because the Green Revolution produced enough grain to rid India of poverty and dependence on food imports. And we are grateful to that, to the farmers of Punjab and Haryana. Today, situation has changed. We don't need as much of grain as the country has started producing. So these farmers need to be induced to move away from producing more grain, which is depleting the soil, which is creating higher costs, which is every year you require more fertilizer, more water to produce the same amount of crop. And so we have to create a system where they can move to another crop. The question is, are we doing that? Now, Pooja, can I request you to please give me a heads up when you have to say 2-3 minutes?
So 2 minutes, sir. Sorry, 2 minutes.
2 minutes, yeah.
Yeah.
So that is the last part, that you have to create a transition mechanism. You cannot just change the laws and say, now you're on your own, you go home and do whatever you can. Now, finally, cooperatives. Farmer producer organizations the world over are majorly in the form of cooperatives. 86% of farming in Denmark is cooperativized. The largest dairy in the world is Fonterra, which is a New Zealand cooperative. Canada, the food producers in California, anywhere in the rich world, the bulk of farming is cooperativized. We have seen the success of our own Amul. Amul is a very successful cooperative, and Amul can actually negotiate with Walmart or Reliance or any other big corporate on equal terms. It has the staying power, it has the bargaining power, it has the economies of scale to stand up to any large market force. Can an individual farmer do that? So we have to use the transition process, the transition period, to provide the organizational strength and capability to our farmers, so that they are actually able to take part in a market economy on equal terms with large companies who will come to them with very high bargaining power, a very high demand, and who can dictate terms to them. If they have to withstand this kind of pressure and still get a good deal, they need to have that kind of organizational structure on their own side. That means cooperativization. So we need to help farmers to form cooperatives and or other farmer producer organizations. We need to create a support system for crop diversification away from grain. And then we can say we should change the current market structure that has helped us in the past, but which has become a burden on today's agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Arun. Aditya, so all panelists have also mentioned that contract farming is a well-known concept, not only in India, abroad, and it's been prevalent in India also for quite some time now. So tell me, what has your experience been on the ground level? And one more question, important question, is the worry that the farmers have about land grabbing by corporates under corporate farming, do you think that is justified? Go ahead, Aditya. Aditya, can you hear me?
Yeah, ma'am, am I audible?
Yeah, you are now. Go ahead. Yeah. We can hear you now, Aditya. Go ahead. Yeah, Aditya, we could hear you.
I can't hear you actually, ma'am. Just a minute. I'll turn off my video to increase my bandwidth.
Sure. We can hear you.
Am I audible now, ma'am?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. So I'll put my views on this. Ma'am, basically, I'll let, for the benefit of all the students, I'll let people know what the bill says. I mean, the bill never mentions what to go away with MSP or to do away with APMC. All these are never mentioned in the bill. The bill says one India, one agriculture market. What essentially it means is less license requirement, less regulatory requirement. That means empowering the farmers by giving them more option. I mean, apart from the APMC, the farmer will get one additional option of selling it to the private player directly. So it's just an addition to what is happening right now, and to break away from the status quo, and it gives a push to the APMCs to actually be more efficient. I mean, currently whatever they are doing, if they are less efficient, they will have to be more efficient with the advent of the private players who are directly going to the farmers and trying to buy their produce from the farmers directly. So nothing wrong in that. That is market force coming into play and lifting the entire system as a whole. Then the bill also talks about time-bound dispute resolution. What is that? That gives more certainty. So certainty is always better for a farmer, for a private player. Certainty would always be better. Now, coming to the specific question that you pointed out, that whether there would be land grabbing, all those things, the bill clearly mentions that can leased land be mortgaged. So if I am into contract farming with a farmer, can I mortgage that land on behalf of the farmer? It is a straight no, that we can't mortgage the land of a farmer, even if we are doing contract farming with the farmer. Then second, can we do any construction on the leased land, or can we do significant modification on the leased land? The answer is yes, but it's a conditional yes. It's a condition with an explicit consent of the farmer. So, and we have to remove any structure that we erect on the farmland once the lease period is over, and hand over back to the farmer on the way we have taken it from the farmer. We have to give the land in the same form back to the farmer. So farmer is well safeguarded by the government, and any government of the day will not like to antagonize itself with the farming community, because farming in India is almost like more than 50% of the community are farmers. So any government of the day will never antagonize them with the farming community. So that is one part. Then on the price discovery part, what happens? Now the government is saying that there are two methods of price fixation. One is the prefixed price, wherein the farmer and the private player will agree on a prefixed price, and that is the price that holds. And there is a hybrid model. Hybrid model is a base price that the private player is willing to give to the farmer with a bonus, just in case there is a price rise and the farmer will lose out significantly. So there also a farmer is also protected. I mean, we have to protect the farmer in that sense, and rightly so, that has been done by the government. Now, there are also trigger mechanisms for extraordinary situation, wherein if the price goes by, say, increases or decreases by, say, 40%, so government comes into play and abolishes the ECA and, plays like a big brother in that party. So, ma'am, with all these things, what I am trying to say here is that are these bills or the reforms that the government is trying to do, are these good, bad, ugly, whatever it is? I want to pose a simple question that I was posing to myself yesterday before coming into this panel, is that if the status quo is so good, then why are Indian farmers still poor? I mean, I was looking at the statistics where the average per capita income of the country, say if it is X, of the farming community is what it is X by 3. It is 1/3 of the average per capita income of the country. So why is a farmer poor if the status quo is so good? And why, why shouldn't we move ahead with a reform? So the answer is a clear yes. So we should move ahead with reforms on this front. I'll also put another question. I mean, most of the panelists have extensively discussed and let us know what exactly are there in the bill. So I'll put a question here. If there is a gadget, say an iPhone, and it is released in the US now, when we are getting it? We are getting it tomorrow, day after, or within a month maximum. If there is a technology in farming, say a new grafted plant that is available in the US or in the Netherlands or New Zealand, when are we getting it? After 1 year, 10 years? Never. I mean, there are some technologies that those were adopted in the West in say 80s. We haven't got that into the country right now. We can easily go ahead and blame it to the government, but have the government facilitated availability of an iPhone? No. The answer is it is the need of a private player to find a buyer, and that is what economics is. So if a buyer and a seller are there and the price matches, then there is a matchmaking there, and it will benefit both. And in this case, government can only be a facilitator. Government can never be a fountainhead for change. Never. Private participation, because of the need, will lead to enterprise solutions, and that will benefit both. So a private player participating in this form and would be an addition to APMC, would always benefit the farmer. Now, I can debate on the MSP, but the government has clarified that MSP will exist. But still, only MSP is not a silver bullet here. So a farm income, how will a farm income increase? It will increase through increased productivity, increased price, and reduced wastage. These three, when they come together, it will lead to increase in farm income. So that is how it is. So increased productivity will be through new technologies. And these new technologies will come from private participation because they have a need to get those raw materials used in their businesses. So that is what we are trying to do. We have a project called Fruit Circular Economy, wherein we have dedicated almost $2 billion for farming development and productivity enhancement. So in this, why we are doing this? Because we have realized that, say for example, in case of apple, India have second largest land under apple cultivation. But in terms of productivity, India is 72nd in world. World average is around 20 tons per hectare, whereas Indian average is around 8 tons per hectare. We are almost less than half of world's average. Some countries have reached almost 50 to 53 tons per hectare, and we are languishing at say 6 to 8 tons per hectare. That is the sorry state we are in, and we are still debating on MSPs, we are still debating on APMCs, we are still not going to the ground, we are not trying to increase the productivity at the farming level, we are not trying to tease the farmers, we are not trying to give them right extension education. All those things need to be seen in not independently, not in silos. It has to be integrated. I'll quote one thing here. In Economic Survey of 2012-2013, this is government agnostic. The government during that time was Congress government. This is a different government now. This is government agnostic. All the government have that right intent to carry the reform forward, and that has happened now. Raghuram Rajan report of Economic Survey 2012-2013 has said that it is necessary that we evolve mechanisms for linking wholesale processing, logistics, and retailing with farm production activities to generate enhanced efficiency and better farm prices. So that is how it should be. It is actually an integration of all the things, of the supply chain, of the farm production, of the prices, the MSP that we are so heavily debating on. So all these things have to come together to help the farmers get a better price and better and price per kg is immaterial. Price per unit of land is what matters. If I produce 10 kg per acre and I produce 50 kg per acre, and I get a lesser price on what I'm getting on 10 kgs. So still it will make more economic sense for a farmer per unit of land, even if the price goes down there. So for us and for private players to participate, when there is certainty, there is more assurance for private players, there is willingness to invest, there is willingness to go and create infrastructure on ground and get that produce for their businesses. Like we are now planning to invest on ground to set up grading and sorting units to get those fruits. Primarily, we are the largest buyer of mangoes in this country for our brand called Maza. So we buy almost 3 lakh tons of mango per annum in this country. And directly, we are buying almost like 20,000 tons, which is less than 10% of our total requirement, because of the cartelization that exists in the APMCs, in the mandis, where there is, in the name of price discovery, I mean, there is a cartel that sits and that will never allow you to directly reach out to the farmers and get that produce. So breaking away from the cartel is something will give us confidence in getting those produce directly from the farmer. And there should be a benchmark on prices. And if a private party is making more money, they should pass on it to the farmer in some way or the other, which is the need of the hour. I mean, there are Nestle's of the world, there are Cokes of the world. We are procuring, say, mangoes in this country. Nestle is buying dairy produce, milk in this country. They are not like disrupting the price in a way which will go down. They are always trying to increase the price for the farmer.
Right.
With
Aditya, 1 minute more, please.
Yeah, of course, ma'am. Sorry. So, ma'am, I have made my point. So, private players will never drive out farmers because farmers are the real suppliers. In an agrarian ecosystem, farmers are the real suppliers. No middleman, no processor is a real supplier. Farmer would be a real supplier. With strengthening of the farmer, it will strengthen the private players also. And we have a challenge of raw material availability. We don't have a challenge of price. So that raw material augmentation will be through strengthening of farmers. So these bills are in a right direction, wherein we support these bills, and we also actually see it as an opportunity to strengthen our relationship with the farmers. Thanks, ma'am.
Great. Thank you so much, Aditya. And like you mentioned, the government has also set up about 1 lakh crore of an agriculture infrastructure fund.
Yeah.
So that people can go ahead, businessmen or whoever wants, they can go ahead and probably build cold storage, warehousing facilities, ripening chambers, etc. So Dr. Ranganathan, very obviously, we're all agreeing that current status quo cannot exist. It has to, the reforms have to come. So, and, government has agreed for amendments to the act. So where do you think is the disconnect now between the farmers and the government? Do you think the government needs to engage more with the farmers? Is that the issue? Dr. Ranganathan, can you just unmute yourself, sir?
Yeah. First of all, thanks very much, Dr. Mishra, and to BIMTech, the director, as well as the students, for giving me the opportunity. It's 4:23 now, so I have about 10-15 minutes. I'll be very brief. I think to get at the core of this issue, you have to peel off the layers of the onions. And you have to discard momentarily the topics that we have been discussing over the past 15 days or so. So we have to go beyond MSP, although I will discuss it in brief. We have to go beyond the amendments. We have to go beyond the ECA. We have to go beyond the obvious shameless hypocrisy of all the parties and the so-called, as I call them, hukum intellectuals and dynasty economists who were for these reforms. But now that Modi has brought them or delivered them, they are suddenly against it. We have to go beyond the hypocrisy of Congress, Amrinder Singh, Sharad Pawar, and everyone. Even BJP for that instance, because they were for some time with the middlemen as well, as all opposition parties are. They must oppose the reforms. So once we go beyond that, it's almost like deconstructing, if I can put it in another way, it's almost like increasing the entropy, find out that what caused the Big Bang. So we are here, let's go back in time. And then you realize what is the core of the issue. And the core of the issue is simply this. It is the good old battle between morally ethical capitalism versus communism and socialism. That is what it boils down to. It boils down to the battle of logic versus illogic and irrational. It's the battle of delivering a choice versus dictating a command. And once you realize this, there are two things that happen. One, if you're intelligent enough, you would realize that you can never convince a communist why communism has been a disaster. Because if we did, we wouldn't have communists around, because there are millions of communists in this country. Socialism and communism are, as I say, they're like squares in a hopscotch. When you play hopscotch, anarchism, communism, and socialism, they're like squares where people hop from one thing to the other. Essentially, they are the same. They build from the same metal. So if you were not able to convince, for example, Sitaram Yechury, where right in front of his eyes, Soviet Union collapsed, China junked communism, Venezuela, we know what the situation of Venezuela is. We know what the so-called highly touted healthcare system of Cuba ultimately came to be. We know what North Korea is. We know what Pol Pot was, the so-called year zero, cultivate, bring everyone to agriculture. So when all these instances have not been able to convince communists why communism is a death knell, it has managed to kill 100 million people around the world in the last 100 years. We cannot convince them. The only thing one can do is either expose them, that also is redundant, or just put your point across. Because one of these days, I really hope that, the great leap forward, the so-called, for the Mao lovers, the great leap forward would possibly, kill their hubris instead of killing humans. But I don't think that is going to happen. Communism will survive because it is a very toxic poison. It's loved by everyone, from the younger generation onwards to, surprisingly, the older generation as well. Incidentally, one of the panelists, who's a good friend, let me quote him. He's a diehard socialist communist, and I'm quoting him now. He hates the free market system, and this is his quote: "The stock market will lead to human extinction in 50 years' time." Now, what can one say? We are all, a lot of students of BIMTech are watching this. Does anybody really believe that giving someone a choice is going to kill humans? Does anyone believe that stock markets are going to bring about human extinction? So once we've straddled over this conundrum, I think things become much easier, because ultimately now, finally, when we come down to and identify the issue, which is delivering a choice versus dictating a command, what is it that the farmers want? So I have very quick points to put across. One would be the pitiful state of Indian agriculture that has been following these very rules and the status quo that these people, socialists and communists who are against the farm bill, they say that this is a perfectly functioning system. It's working very well. The other, I would briefly touch upon the disaster that MSP has brought about in this country. And the third, the freedom of choice that not these symposium attending so-called midnight farmers, as I call them, is important for them, but for real farmers. So let's come to farming. Now, as Mr. Arun said, so rightly put it, the whole domain of agriculture is connected to 3 or 4 other critical, not only economic, not only in economic sense, but also in social sense, in our health sense, science sense. So unless we realize that we have to be Darwinians, not social Darwinians like communists are, we have to have competition, we have to have free market, we have to give choice. India, not only economically, but agriculturally as well, is going down the drain. Now you look at the data. Agriculture contributes 13.5% to our economy, one of the lowest performing sectors. And yet, a quarter of our adult population is involved in this domain. A quarter. 44% of our 475 million strong labor force is involved in agriculture. Can you imagine? This is simply unsustainable in the West or in the middle income economy. In the West, it is 2%. In the middle income economy, it is 3 to 5%. Here, 44%. We cannot sustain this. Let me give you one example how this is impossible. Leave aside that in no other sector do we find that 17 lakh farmers or 17 lakh people who follow a domain have committed suicide. Do you find in an IT industry 17 lakh IT professionals have committed suicide, 17 lakh scientists have committed suicide? No. This tells you about the state of our agriculture. Secondly, let's just take one example of one produce, let's say sugarcane. Now, India is the world's second largest producer of sugarcane. Sugarcane, we produce about 350 billion kilograms of sugarcane every year, 350 billion kilograms. Sugarcane takes 9% of the cultivated area of the arable land, and yet 71% of the irrigation water. And yet we have been producing world's second largest producer. The amount of water required, Indian water required, irrigation water, good quality irrigation water required to sustain this, produce this 350 billion kilograms of sugarcane is 1 quadrillion liter. I'm not talking of billion or trillion, 1 quadrillion, which is equivalent to 10 Gobind Sagar dams. This is what we are doing to our water table, to our water sustenance, to our ecology, to our environment, producing a crop where the sugar prices, world sugar prices, have halved in the last 6 years. And yet we continue to produce this crop. Punjab, people were talking about Punjab, and Arun was absolutely right when he talked about at the moment, logic dictates that the moment government sets an MSP or a price, people are going to produce only that because it is sustainable. And as one of the panelists said, that there is so much of smuggling going on of rice. People from Bihar are bringing rice to Punjab. Why are they doing it? Because government has set a price. So it is profitable for them. There is black marketing going on. In Punjab, do you think, just look at the water table of Punjab, what has happened? They are just producing wheat and rice because of the MSP that only 6 to sometimes maybe 10% of farmers of MSP is availed by the farmers. Let's come to the second issue, which is MSP. Now, the moment you have the government regulating the price, first of all, it is totally unethical and it is immoral. We are not a communist Soviet bloc. We know what happened to Soviet bloc. Government has no business to dictate what the price of the produce should be. It is absolutely immoral. It is almost criminal. But now that the government is doing it, now that shamefully the BJP or the ruling government also says we are going to stick by it, not only stick by it, we've increased the MSP price. You know, they should be removing MSP. It is a free market, you know, and I'll tell you exactly who says this. That also would be very revealing. But let's come to the statistics. The government's job, you can say in a limited way, because we are a poor country, is twofold: to procure agriculture. One, it is to distribute during for the PDA system, and two, it is to maintain a buffer stock. The buffer stock of rice, as all experts maintain, should be 40 million tons. Right now in 2020, it is 103 million tons. We have procured 60 million tons more. Why? Because we are so in love with this MSP. We are in love placating this vote bank, farmers' vote bank, that we keep on buying things we have no use for. And ultimately what happens, it is either rotting away in our FCI godowns, 60 million extra tons, or the government does a wholesale of it. It sells it much lower than the MSP. So when we talk about farmers must guaranteed MSP, the government itself is not selling at the MSP. It is selling maybe, and what is happening to the other people who want to buy this produce? They find it is cheaper to import rice than to buy it at MSP, because farmers cannot sell it to them. Farmers are selling it to the government. Now, let me give you what the farmers think. The farmers in a recent survey, 62% said they want to set the price for their own produce. They don't want the government to set it. The reason, because in the last 15 years, they say, the farmers, not these fly-by-night operating farmers, the real farmers, they say we have lost 45 lakh crores for the faulty MSP evaluation by the government. This is crime that is happening. I mean, somebody should go to jail for this. Somebody is not going to jail because everyone is happy placating it and India is going down the drain. Listen to the farmers. A recent survey said 48% of the farmers don't want their next generation to take up farming. Why? These are the same farmers you supposedly are fighting for, denying them a choice. Now, when you have a choice between, let's say, Toyota, Honda, or an Ambassador, and you are happily fighting for against these laws and refuse to go in an Ambassador, which is worse than a bullock cart, why are you denying the farmers a choice? Why shouldn't the government come to a free mandi market system where the government also procures like any other private player, procures? Secondly, let's talk about the Essential Commodities Act. What was the reason why we had pitiful storage conditions? The reason was that at any point of time, the government could declare that hoarding is illegal. So nobody was interested in making these, state-of-the-art, modern, air-conditioned godowns where the farmers could produce their whatever crop all year round and then store it for all year round. Now, with the ECA gone, hopefully things would change. You would have the private players coming in. They would be setting up these huge godowns, and the farmers would be able to produce at any time they want because now the storage facility is there. Thirdly, you're talking about MSP. Now, I come back to MSP again and again. The reason for MSP was when we were a basket case, when we were forced to import third-grade American wheat in the 1960s. But with the coming of the Green Revolution, all that has changed. But what has not changed is the government realizing, or the political parties realizing, that 83% of Indian households that are dependent on agriculture are possibly the world's biggest voting bloc. So they have to keep on placating them. Otherwise, you tell me, why is it that MSP is there only for 23 crops? Why not for every crop? Why is it that some states don't have APMC at all, like Kerala? And the same communists are fighting for reinstating or removing the APMC amendment? So having gone beyond the hypocrisy, having dealt with the core of the issue, it is irreversible. If it is a battle between socialism and communism and logic, rationale, pro-science, Darwinian ethics, moral, ethical capitalism, then it is a no battle at all. It's a no show at all. And India will not revert to this kind of diktats that we were prone to for the last 70 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ranganathan. I must, before I hand over the session to Aditi, for the Q&A, I must compliment and thank each of the panelists for a very insightful discussion. I'm sure there's been a lot of learning for all our students. So thank you so much, all the panelists. Aditi, I'm sure the students are waiting to ask their questions. Can I hand it back to you, please?
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Okay, so Eco Chamber, the Economics Club of BIMTech, organized a contest to pick up the best questions from the students, who will be given an opportunity to ask questions to the panel. So we selected 3 students, and now I would like to call them. First, I would like to call Utsav Mahajan.
Yeah, a very good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for giving this opportunity. So my question to all the panelists is, like, these latest reforms will benefit big farmers and rich farmers, as they will be able to sell their produce through either APMC or to private buyers. But what about the interest of small farmers? What kind of benefits and advantage will come to them under the new Farm Bill 2020?
So, Mr. Arun, do you want to take it on? TK Arun, sir?
Yeah. So, as I said, like, it's the same question that is posed to you. Do you want to become an entrepreneur? You want to do a startup of your own, or you want to join a company? So every small farmer might not be in a position to succeed as an entrepreneur on his own. That's why we created things like Amul, where we organize these individual small farmers into cooperative societies. We created federations of cooperative societies. We created a confederation. And that is how agriculture is organized in most parts of the world. As I said, in the bulk of agriculture is cooperative. In Australia and New Zealand, much of agriculture is cooperative. So small farmer doesn't operate as a small farmer alone, forlorn, standing in the middle of the crop. He is part of a larger organization network, which allows him to have bargaining power, and he's able to actually respond to market signals as to what the market needs and supply it and gain from it. So that is how things will succeed, not by very small individual producers. See, an entrepreneur in the industry, he can switch his production lines fairly fast. He can increase production, decrease production, do many things. A farmer produces one particular kind of crop depending upon the agroclimatic conditions, his technical know-how, and he produces it once or twice or thrice a year, and he is stuck with it. So he needs to have some level of certainty and some kind of insurance and price support, which many people in industry can do without. I think this also needs to be factored in. So I would say that laws are fine in principle, but before you are in a position to implement these laws, you need a transition mechanism to be put in place. That we haven't done. That is the problem. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Arun, also as far as the government is concerned, we spoke about farmer producer organization, right? So the government is encouraging and hoping that at least 10,000 farmer producer FPOs will be set up in the next couple of years. That's when the small farmers can get together and operate as one of the big farmers, or they'll have a better bargaining capacity with them. Sorry, yeah, go ahead, Aditi. Next.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, sir. Now I would like to call Aditi to ask the question.
Thank you, Aditi. My question is for all the panelists. Aditya sir and Kushpal sir had spoken a little along that directions, but I'd like to have more clarity. So my question is that will there be enough government intervention in case the farmers are cheated by the private buyers? And will there be enough oversight by the government in the new provisions of the bill?
Dr. Ranganathan, can I pass on the question to you? Actually, Dr. Sukhpal Singh has,
Sure. So I think that's a very interesting question. But at one level, I think this country, if it has to become developed, or it has to at least move along the lines of becoming developed, has to realize that we have to do away with this my baap state. We have to do away with the fact that everything we look for the government to do. Sure, ethical capitalism does not mean crony capitalism. We need to have some regulation. But let's say, Aditi, that you want to become a farmer, right? Now, you will have all the rights that any other entrepreneur has. You would have a piece of land and you would hopefully not grow wheat or rice on it, or grow some cash crop on it so that it becomes more sustainable, more profitable. And if it doesn't, if somebody cheats you, you have all the rights to go to a court or to a district. The procedure should be the same for any profession. I'm sorry, but we have to. I may sound very draconian, but I'm not. I'm just looking at it from a very detached angle. We have to get out of this emotional connect that we've had with agriculture for the last 60, 70 years. Those Manoj Kumar songs of Mere Desh Ki Dharti Sona Ugle. We have this connect because we aren't farmers. We are suckers for Indian films and Mere Desh Ki Dharti. Talk to the farmers. As I said, people have talked to the farmers. They don't want 48% of them don't want their next generation to take up farming. It is unsustainable. It is unprofitable. And if we have to make it sustainable, if we have to make it profitable, we have to inject a huge dose of science. We have to inject a huge dose of rational economics. I haven't even come to how the communists and socialists are totally against genetically modified foods as well. We cannot afford to feed our people, 1.3 billion people, for the next 15, 20 years if we do not shift to scientific methodologies in genetically modified groups, crops. So all these things have to come together. And if they do, you would realize, big or small, a farmer under a ethical, moral, capitalistic system is just like you, Aditi, an entrepreneur. Treat him like you would be treated by anyone else.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Aditi. And finally, I would like to call Sanchit.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would like to hail every panelist for clarity in their thoughts. But putting things in a larger perspective and seeing things in a longer term, my question is specifically to Mr. Anand sir and Akshay sir, that if these reforms are being implemented holistically on the ground, then what, according to you, be their contribution in our national goal of making India a $5 trillion economy by 2025? And what proportion of contribution do you believe that they will make in this direction?
Shall I go first, Dr. Mishra?
Yeah, please. Certainly, yeah.
I think let's get over this buzzword of $5 trillion economy, which the Prime Minister was touting every second speech that he gave before COVID. I don't think we will reach a $5 trillion economy in the next 7 to 10 years. I mean, Arun, of course, would be able to inform you much more because he's an expert in these matters. But I think let's get away from that and talk about what these reforms actually really mean. What they mean is that finally, this is the 1991 liberalization movement for Indian agriculture. And this is a bigger reform than what 1991 was. The reason is that 44% of our labor force is involved in this. 83% of all Indian households are dependent on Indian agriculture. And if you were to reform Indian agriculture, you would realize that those 83% of households would be happier than what they are right now. I'm not saying that these reforms would, start delivering in the next year, maybe 2 years, but it is the right track. It is the only track. The other track is Venezuela, Soviet Union, pre-reformed China, pre-opening up China, and Cuba. And we've seen people have explored that system. It's not that, and science does not believe in repeating failed experiments. Politicians always do. But here, thankfully, I think some sense would prevail. And the other thing that I said, we have to get out of agriculture. We have to look at it dispassionately. Any domain, any sector that involves 200, 300 million odd people and yet delivers only 13.5% contributes to our GDP is unsustainable. We have to find new employment for those people. I hope the government is looking. We have to get out of agriculture.
Okay. Mr. Arun, do you want to add to it? Can you hear me? Speak, Arun?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to add to it?
Yeah. Yeah. See, I would just say, yeah, see, there are some things which are beyond the farmers' competence. For example, electricity. It is very clear. The only way farmer income can go up sharply is if we are able to capture a part of the value added to the produce before it reaches the consumer's hands. That is, before it finally reaches the retail market and in the consumer. It undergoes various stages of value addition. This requires, in most cases, some amount of power, whether it is climate control storage, washing and drying, or even further processing. That power sector in India has been destroyed by politicians. Around 30% of the power that is produced in this country is not paid for. It is either stolen or it is given away. And as theft is patronized by the political system. Unless they end this, your power system is broke. And without stable power supply during the daytime, not in the middle of the night at 2 in the morning, during the daytime, you cannot have agro-processing industry growing up in rural areas. And this is entirely in the hands of politicians. What can farmers, what can industrialists do? They pay outrageous rates for every unit of power they consume because the electricity system is broken, and they charge industry the highest rates of power they can charge in order to cross-subsidize with people who steal power or otherwise who just have unmetered connections. So there are many things that are required to be done by the government, and the government must do that. Once you have done all that, then I think these reforms are necessary for India to become a prosperous economy. Like I said, we have seen this happen before our eyes. When the economy was growing very fast, labor was being sucked out from the rural areas and being transported to cities, and they were earning higher wages, reducing poverty both in rural areas and in urban areas. That process needs to accelerate, go further ahead. And for that, we need not just farming, but the rest of the economy also to grow. And once that happens, even farming will become more productive. And we need stable policies for all of these. And required policies are a part of what the government has announced. Only thing is that you also need to plan for the transition. See, the government keeps on saying there will be MSP. MSP is not the issue. Open-ended procurement at the MSP is the issue. As Anand said, you have some 23 crops which are announced in MSP. But how much do you procure at MSP for these? You don't. You produce for wheat and rice grown in Northwest India, there is open-ended procurement. And that open-ended procurement is actually diverting funds that could be spent on healthcare in Bihar, healthcare in Odisha, where some of the poorest people in this country live. Instead, that is being transferred to support production of grain that this country does not need. So that is the policy corrective that has to be made. But those people, you got the farmers of Punjab to do this over the years through inducement by policy so that you can have the green revolution. In order to make them change their cropping pattern, you need to create a transition mechanism. Please do that also. These laws are then fine.
Okay, and let me just extend that a little more. So Arun, tell me this. Okay, I agree MSP is not the solution, but till the time the transition is happening, do you think as far as even MSP is concerned, it should be a direct digital payment solution? Do you think that would work better for our small farmers at least?
Many things can happen. Why should all the procurement be done by the FCI? The FCI, when the FCI goes and buys from the Punjab Mandi, the FCI happily accepts spoiled grain, sub-quality grain, because FCI officials can be bribed to do that. There are FCI loaders whose daily wage is, whose monthly earnings are more than 1 lakh rupees. Whose simple job is to load grain and unload grain. So FCI is a very high-cost operation. So suppose you privatized or you allowed private companies to operate part of this procurement for you and stock holding for you, and you bind them through contracts that are enforceable, then you'll be able to have the buffer stock that you require without having the inefficient FCI being the sole agency to carry this out. And at the same time, farmers will use the idea that you can sell to a private agency. So there are various mechanisms through which you can allow the transition to take place.
Right. Okay. Aditi, yeah, one more question.
Okay, so one of the students have asked, in initial stages, corporates will do predatory pricing, paying more than the market rates. Once the mandis are dead, the sector will be monopolized by them and farmers will become their slaves.
Okay, Anand, do you want to take that? Yeah.
Well, what are we trying to do here? Are we trying to reinvent the wheel? In a free market system, you would always find crooks. The important point is that there is no monopoly. You will always, of course, the government, I'm not saying that capitalism should be unregulated. Please don't misunderstand me. Everyone, like everyone, hate crony capitalism. But crony capitalism is the result not of capitalism, but of cronism. Please realize this. No other system or ideology in the world has led to more prosperity than capitalism has. So there are laws, there need to be regulations. I'm sure there are for preventing cartelization, as happens in all sectors. Please treat agriculture as any other sector. We have to I cannot emphasize on this enough. Agriculture has to be looked at without any emotions that we've had over the last 70 years. Like IT industry, like engineering, like, FCMGs. Treat agriculture like you would any other profession.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that. I'm sure students have a whole lot of questions, but we'll need to step in here. Yeah, we're closing to 5 o'clock. Shedigar sir, can I request you to kindly deliver the word of thanks, please? Sir? Dr. Shedigar? Sir, can you unmute yourself? Hanji.
I'm sure students might have got some clarity about some of the issues which they might be reading in the newspapers or listening in the TV, mainly because of the agitations going on. And with this diverse opinion given by the different panelists, the many interesting points have come up. Of course, as everybody knows, there is a farm crisis, which has been raised mainly by Mr. Devendra Sharma, and is also emphasized by Anand Ranganathan as well as Aditya. But there are other related issues also. As Arun has pointed out, status quo cannot continue. And one of the important points which has come up is the procurement by the government, which is taking place more than what is required. It is as much as more than 100 million tons, as pointed out by Professor Anand Ranganathan, as against the PDS requirement about 14 million tons or the storage capacity of around 20 million tons. And it has been going on during the last so many decades. Only fortunately, this time the government made use of that excess, what we call the stock, for distributing to the landless the migrant laborers. This will go on, and I think for more than 6 months they go given the free, the food grains to the poor people, mainly because of the pandemic and all. Otherwise, it was getting wasted because the food grains were lying in the open grounds. And it's Aditya also has pointed out about how the cartels are coming in the way of the corporate units of procuring from the mandis. So there are vested interest and also the issues like the MSP. Now, this again is a debatable. I am not being able to understand. Of course, the government has said that the MSP will continue, but there is an argument by some people that the market prices should be above the MSP. If the market prices are above the MSP, then I don't understand what is the meaning of the MSP. The very fact that the concept of the MSP is to rescue the farmers when the market fails. Let us not forget the early 2000, because of the retail boom. In fact, the Food Corporation of India was finding it difficult to procure, even to maintain its buffer stock, because at that time, all the retailers, whether it is a Big Bazaar or any other, or Aditya retail company, they are offering more than 100 rupees, whether it is in the Bhopal Mandi or the Punjab Mandi or the Haryana Mandi. So we cannot say that government cannot make it compulsory that the market price should be above this thing. And also the points about the creating the cooperative, especially the Arun has pointed out about the Amul example and how the cooperative system can empower the farmers. But let us also not forget that this time the government had to rush because when all the previous the governments and failed to bring this what you call the big reforms which the experts have been talking about. This time, because of the shattered economy, when the government was looking for really big push or reform. So that is how the government thought of. So probably the government did not have the luxury of setting up the required infrastructure prior to the implementing the law. So the many interesting points have come up. Now it is for the students to discuss among themselves and see what is good for the country's economy, and especially in terms of creating the conducive business environment, because you are going to be the part of the corporate world, whether you are specializing in the insurance or the retail or the international business, or going to be a marketing manager or the finance. Ultimately, the rural sector is a crucial part of the economy, and that is how you are concerned. So that is why you have to discuss among yourself what is good for the economy, and ultimately you have to formulate your own point of view, because the recruiters are expecting your own individual point of view. From that point of view, I'm sure that today's discussion helped you in understanding the issue. So on behalf of BIMTech, I would like to thank all the panelists, Dr. Sukhpal Singh, Mr. Devendra Sharma, Professor Anand Ranganathan, T.K. Arun, and Aditya Pratap. Incidentally, Aditya Pratap is related to BIMTech because his wife is from BIMTech from 13-15 batch. So I'm thankful to all the panelists, and we are going to document it and also make it available to the public through, we have to decide what should be the appropriate way through which we can circulate it. It is, I'm sure that the director will support the economics area in bringing out a booklet and make it so that it will be available for all the policy makers. And I also would like to thank our chairperson, Jayashree Mohta, and Dr. Ajit Ranade and Vikas Kandoi, because their presence has enhanced the importance of this discussion. And I also would like to thank the Vice Chancellor of Birla Global University, Professor P.P. Mathur, and also Mr. V.K. Das and Professor Naik. And I also would like to thank my colleagues and the students. And thank you one and all. With that, our discussion gets concluded.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks to our students, Aditi particularly.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.